ChatGPT 3 first came out, I took it for a test drive. Did anybody else do that when ChatGPT 3 came out? What did you do with it? Like, what prompt did you type in? What did you try?
Tell me a joke.
Yeah.
I wrote emails.
Sorry, say it again?
I'm very bad at writing stuff, so I use it to write emails.
You used it to write emails. Okay, got it. Okay, what else? Raise your hand and I'll call on you. What's that?
Write a short Shakespeare play.
Write a short Shakespeare play. Okay. Who used it for programming related things? Okay.
Just to simply convert from like one database technology, so here's a script that would build out some inserts for one database technology. Please show me how it would look with Postgres, this conversion between different small sort of syntax differences exist between database platforms. And it worked out very well.
In case anybody didn't hear that, to summarize, converting syntax from one database management system to another, and sounds like it worked out quite well. Okay. Who else?
To write
Yeah, go ahead.
to write this test from aspect to mini test.
Oh, to translate a test from RSpec to mini test. Okay. I saw a hand over here. Yeah.
Ask to write controller was the prompt, but this is moving to the video work for me.
Okay. To write a Rails controller? Okay. And how did that work out? Not good? Not good. Okay. Yes.
Pretty bad at Bash, so I usually ask people Bash tips, so we write some scripts for Bash.
Okay. You used it to write some Bash scripts. How did that work out?
Works good.
Works good? Okay. Yes. Method naming. How did that go for you?
It's fine. It's better than the analyst.
Okay. Yeah, Adrian.
To give me the prompt for FFmpeg to convert some video files.
Okay. Pretty good? Okay. Anybody else have any use cases that they used it for? Yeah.
Ask it to plan road trips.
Plan road trips.
Yeah, works pretty well.
Okay. Not programming related, but interesting still.
Also not programming, but constructive criticism.
Constructive criticism regarding
Feedback. People.
on.
Performance.
Okay, got it. Okay. What's that? Refactor this method. How did that work? Depends? Yeah, that's kind of my experience too. Okay, so I didn't get as much of this answer as I expected, but when I first tried ChatGPT 3, I used it for what I thought was the most obvious use case, which was to write some code for me. Like write a program that does such and such. Did anybody else, whether it's version 3 or 4 or whatever, did anybody else use ChatGPT to write, like, say, write a program that does this, or write a function that does this, or something like that? Okay. Now, I'm going to ask if you liked it or if you didn't like it. Raise your hand if you asked it to write a program or function, and you were able to just like use what it gave you, and you liked it, and it was good. Okay. Not out of the box.
Just had to make some small adjustments.
And then raise your hand if you did that same thing and you didn't really feel like it was usable the way it was. Okay. Yeah. So I see a lot of criticism online of ChatGPT, both online and just talking to people. People criticize ChatGPT because they're like, well, it hallucinates a lot. It doesn't write very good code. It'll like, for example, it'll make a library call for a function that doesn't even exist, which it definitely does. And so people are like, this is not really that useful for programming for that reason. And they kind of dismiss it entirely. That was my exact feeling when I first used ChatGPT 3. Then two things happened that were very, very important. And these two things that happened completely changed my mind. And let me ask first, raise your hand if you're currently of the opinion that ChatGPT is not very helpful for programming for those reasons that I mentioned. Okay, keep your hands up. I'm going to count you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this entire talk will be useful to 5 people. Yeah, thank you very much.
I think a lot of us are on the halfway point, like we're on a it's
Okay.
works.
But I'm sure that at least everybody will get at least one tidbit out of this talk, I hope. So 2 things that happened that changed my mind, and I hope it changes your mind too, my 5 friends in the audience. One thing that happened was I made the realization that writing code is not actually the best use case for ChatGPT. Because think about it, there's so many other parts of the software development lifecycle. Before you start writing code, you need to decide what you're going to do. You have to design the feature, design the change you're going to make. There has to be testing involved. Maybe you're going to write some automated tests for the change you're going to make. And then after you write the code, there's probably going to be some testing and review and stuff like that. Then there's deployment, monitoring, all the stuff that happens after you write the code. And so considering all that stuff that happens before and all the stuff that happens after, the actual writing the code isn't all that big of a slice of the pie. It's not all that time consuming. And honestly, it's not all that hard. The hard stuff is everything that comes before and comes after, like figuring out how to make it do what you wanted to do. It's not necessarily the hardest part. And so if we have this idea that ChatGPT isn't very good at writing code, then it's like, it's not helping us with the hardest part. It's helping us with this like one small sliver. And to say it's not that good because it can't help us with this one small part, it's like, well, that's not even that helpful anyway. And also, whenever does a human just write like a big chunk of code and just like plop it into a repo, you know? Like we tend to write code like a little bit at a time, or at least hopefully we write it at a little bit at a time, test it to make sure that that little bit of code we wrote works as we expect it to work, commit that, start over. Other than like pretty inexperienced people, we usually don't just like write a big chunk of code. And we wouldn't take somebody else's code and like we wouldn't hire like a contractor and they write like a whole file or a whole program at a time and we just plop it into our repo and call it good. Like that's not something we've ever done before, so why would we start doing that now? So this use case that a lot of people are expecting to use ChatGPT for, which I kind of, without thinking about it too much, was expecting to use it for, this use case like doesn't actually make a lot of sense when you look at it closely. So that's one thing that happened, is I came to that realization. The other thing that happened is that ChatGPT 4 came out. That might not seem like a big deal, but ChatGPT 4 is so much smarter than ChatGPT 3 that it's almost an entirely different product. Raise your hand if you're currently using ChatGPT at all for programming work. Okay. Maybe 90% of the people raise your hand if you're not. Okay, a lot of people kind of. Okay, so maybe 80 or 90% of the people in this room are. Okay, out of those of us who are, raise your hand if you're using 4 as opposed to 3. And if you don't know, that means you're using 3, because if you're using 4, you would know. Okay. And to get one more view of it, who's using ChatGPT 3 right now? Okay. I don't know how many of you raised your hands, but this talk will now be useful to more than 5 people, maybe at least 20 people. I implore you to upgrade to ChatGPT 4 because it's so much better. It's well worth the $20 a month. Like I would pay $100 a month for ChatGPT 4 Or I would allow somebody else to pay $500 a month because, okay, if I think your employer should pay $500 a month for you to use ChatGPT 4 because it would be worth it to them. I don't want to pay that out of my own pocket, but it would the productivity you get would pay itself back. What I'm trying to say is it's worth way more than $20 a month. Okay. So, is anyone familiar with the 3 levels of abstraction in programming? Pottery, accounting, and inventory? Oh, not as many people laughed at that as I expected. These are just notes to remind me what I'm planning to talk about. Okay, so I want to talk about levels of abstraction in programming work. Let's say it's a really long time ago, pre-calculators, before the invention of calculators, and you have a pottery store. You want to know how much money you made last month. The only way to know is to add it up manually. You're working at a very low level of abstraction. You're doing very fine-grained, low-level, tedious mental grunt work. And then, let's fast forward to sometime in the future. We have calculators. You want to add up your pottery store's revenue. You can use the calculator. Now you've ascended one level of abstraction, and now you don't have to do this really low-level grunt work. You're still doing some grunt work, but it's a higher level of grunt work. You're delegating some of that mental grunt work to the calculator. Fast forward a bit more, now we have accounting and inventory software. Now we've ascended quite a bit more on what you might call the mental grunt work ladder. You don't have to think about these low-level details as much. It's a much bigger leap than even just no calculator to calculator, because now you can, with the integration of a point-of-sale system, you don't even have to manually enter how many of such things were sold and for how much and stuff like that. The POS system just integrates with your accounting software. And at the end of the month, how much money did I make? Well, just pull up the report. It's a much higher level of abstraction. And this is an important thing, I think, to think about in the progression of technology, and it's very relevant to us programmers. Because what we humans want, we conceive of our end goals. I want to build, what's an example of some software a person might build? Ticketing software. I want to build a ticketing system. That's your end goal, what you want. But then, right now, we have to deal with a lot of tedium. Good example is before Rails, if you're doing, let's say, raw PHP, no framework. You'd have to deal with so many low-level details, so much mental grunt work. Then Rails comes along and automates a lot of stuff, and we have convention over configuration, scaffold generation, stuff like that. Lauren, your tool from yesterday, something like that, eliminates a lot of that mental grunt work. Avo also, stuff like that. These progressions allow us to think less about means and more about the ends, less about the low-level mental grunt work and more about the things we want to, the big picture things that we want to accomplish. A point that I want to make today is that ChatGPT helps us do that. It helps us think less about these low-level details and more about these higher-level objectives that we want to accomplish. If writing big chunks of code or writing entire programs at once isn't always a great use case for ChatGPT, what is? Does anybody have any thoughts? Yeah. Sorry? Learning about the domain. Okay, so maybe you're writing software for a pottery store. You can use ChatGPT to learn about pottery. Is that the kind of thing you mean? Yeah. Okay. Learning about the domain. Okay, what other use cases? Yeah. Creating abstractions. Okay. Okay, so tell me if this is what you mean. Like, maybe you want to express some part of the code in a certain way based on what you know about the domain, but you're having trouble landing on what you feel like is an appropriate abstraction. Maybe ChatGPT can help with that. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I mean, I can have a concept in my mind, but then I can validate that with ChatGPT.
I see. In case anybody didn't hear, you can have a concept in your mind, and then you can validate that with ChatGPT. Okay, what other use cases?
Creative writing.
Say it again?
Creative writing.
Creative, I don't know why I said creative writing. Okay, creative writing. Okay, what else? Programming stuff. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's actually a good one that I hadn't thought of that specific use case before. I'll repeat part of that in case anybody didn't hear. Using it for localization and internationalization kind of stuff. Maybe you can take like your entire it could generate like an entire localization file and do that for multiple languages and handle the translations and stuff like that. I don't know if that's exactly what you're saying, but okay. I saw more hands. Yeah. Writing tests. That was one of my categories, so I was hoping somebody would say that. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a really good use case, and I'm going to touch on that one more later. So if I understand what you're saying, it's kind of like you want ChatGPT to give you an illustration, an example, like I want to write this certain thing, but I'm not sure exactly how I might go about it. So you look to ChatGPT for an illustration of how that might go. That doesn't mean you're going to copy and paste the exact code that it gives you, but what it shows you might give you some ideas, and you say, oh, okay, like that's how you would do it. All right, I don't want to do it exactly that way, but that gives me some ideas and helps move me forward. Is that kind of what you're saying? Okay, great. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so you're saying smaller scaffolding than what Rails does. Maybe that could be expressed as like writing boilerplate so that you don't have to. Okay. Okay. Yeah, there were more hands. I apologize. I have to move on for time reasons. So here's my 3 categories. And these are by no means all the categories, but these are 3 of maybe the more important ones. Testing, as you said. Learning new technologies or avoiding learning new technologies. And, well, because, if it can just do it for you, then you can skip the learning step. And the third one is testing. Let's talk about that. So, and I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. I asked someone yesterday, did you have any favorite talks from the conference so far? And she said, the shorter ones. So I'm going to try to be brief. Okay, testing. I'm a big advocate of testing, and I write tests for most of my code. But testing has a certain tedium to it, because there's more than one job that you're doing while you're testing. You have to figure out what you're going to test, and then you have to figure out how to write a test to do the thing that you want it to do. Maybe you want to visit a certain page, fill out this form, click submit, expect something on the subsequent page. Okay, I've decided what I want to do. Now I have to translate all that to syntax. That's mental effort that's required in order to do that work. ChatGPT can take away a lot of that mental effort, because you can just say the thing that I just said, visit this page, fill out this form, blah, 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 and it can write a test for you. Maybe it can't read your mind and write the test perfectly, but it can at least take care of the boilerplate. You can copy and paste that and then modify it to suit your needs, maybe rename the elements and such to match your actual code. I had said earlier that never in the past do we ever just copy and paste an entire file from some source into our code base. With testing, it's a bit different, because code has to meet specifications, but tests are specifications. So it's a bit different to copy an entire file at once and paste it into your code base. It's unlikely that any file you copy and paste into your code base is going to meet your desired specifications. But if the thing you're copying and pasting is the specification, that's a much different story. So that's a key difference between why testing is different from application code when using ChatGPT. A thing to note about testing is that ChatGPT can take away grunt work, but it can't be a substitute for skill. ChatGPT will happily write tests that are meaningless or tautological or just dumb for one reason or another, so you have to be really careful. It's not going to be the case that somebody who has no testing experience can ask ChatGPT to write tests and just be good. You still have to have the test skill, because you have to know whether what ChatGPT is giving you is good or not. So that's kind of unfortunate. I wish that wasn't true, but that is true, so that's good to be aware of. I found this prompt really, really useful. I went through this process, and it was really like, it was one of those moments that was like, wow, this thing is so smart. And right now, we're at the infancy of tools like this. One can imagine a future where some of these wrinkles are ironed out. But I told ChatGPT to follow this, I guess you can call it an algorithm. So it's like you're programming ChatGPT. I'll give you a test case. I'll describe my experience, because you can read this. I'll tell you how it went. I would give a test case to ChatGPT. It would give me the test code. I'd paste that in to my editor. I would run it. The test would fail. I would paste back the failure message. It would give me the code to make the failure message go away. I'd run the test again, maybe get another failure, paste it back. We'd repeat that until the test passed, and then repeat the whole thing over again. And it was just mind-blowing, because if the test is targeted enough and fine-grained enough, it doesn't give ChatGPT a lot of room for interpretation, so it's not a lot of room for it to go wrong. And I can imagine a future where a lot more of this is automated and we're not switching back and forth between ChatGPT and the editor. It's all just built in. I'm actually slowly and lazily working on such a tool myself. Somebody else will certainly beat me to it, but I'm really excited for that future and if and when we get there. I saw a hand, yeah.
Yeah, good question. For this to work, do you use like small isolated cases, or is it something where ChatGPT needs to know your own code base?
Good question. The question was, do you use this for small isolated cases, or does ChatGPT have to be aware of your whole code base? What I've done so far, so I've been writing a Vim plugin in Python. I'm not a Python developer, not a Vim plugin developer, but I asked ChatGPT to write me some tests for this Vim plugin and just help me with the Vim plugin in general. What I usually do is I'll paste in the relevant files. So I'll say like, here's a couple relevant files, and here's my failing test, or here's my test shell with a comment that describes the test that I want. Fill in this missing part of this test for me, and because I've given it the relevant files, it knows what to do. Now, again, hopefully, we're heading toward a future where I don't have to manually decide what's relevant and supply that to ChatGPT. Hopefully, we're headed toward a future where it just already has that, but for now, it obviously has to be done manually. Okay. Learning new technologies. This is one of the more time-consuming and tedious parts of programming, especially when you're learning something where the documentation is less than perfect. Not to pick on Docker, but it makes a decent example. Who finds the Docker documentation great? 0 hands. I did a little experiment. I took the first page of the Docker documentation, because that's as far as you need to go to find something confusing, and I copied some of that documentation. It was said like, what's an image or something like that. It was a description of what an image is or what a container is. And I pasted that to ChatGPT and I said, hey, like, I don't understand this. Specifically, I don't understand this word and this word. Can you like explain this to me? You can have like you can take a piece of documentation and like have a conversation with that documentation. And that's like so much better than what we were doing before. And then like someone said earlier, you can ask for an illustration. It's like, okay, well, if I wanted to like make my own image or container in Docker, how would I do that? It can do that. You could ask it to make a custom tutorial for you. And then if you don't like it, you can say, no, I actually was hoping for a different kind of tutorial that like went over this instead. As you're going through the tutorial, you can ask, if you get stuck on something, you can ask for advice on that part. It just makes the process of learning new technologies so much more efficient. So I think that's another really good use case for ChatGPT. Another one is planning. In programming, we do planning at all levels, from what we're going to do in the next 6 months to what we're going to do in the next 5 minutes. ChatGPT can help at all levels. I asked ChatGPT, for example, I want to build, I was talking with my friend over here yesterday about this project that I'm working on. I want to build a chess-playing robot. Help me figure out how I might do this. And one thing that's very significant that I discovered is not only did I say, help me plan this chess-building robot project, I said, before you give me a response, ask me questions about my project. And that flips the roles and it puts the mental burden, it shifts the mental burden from you to the tool. And so it asked me like 8 or 9 questions about the project. What's your timeline? What's your budget? Do you have any robotics experience? Do you want to code the chess algorithm yourself, or do you want to use something off the shelf? Like, these were all really good questions that I hadn't necessarily thought about before. And if I hadn't done that, the tool would have just made assumptions about what I want, and more likely than not, the assumptions would have been wrong. So that technique of telling it to ask me questions is so helpful that I include that with every prompt now. Quick side note, there's something called custom instructions. Maybe you guys know about this, but you can plug in, like with every prompt includes such and such custom instructions. So I just put that in the custom instructions, like ask me questions when you feel like it's appropriate, and that has really helped. This is that tip I just said in writing. So again, a reminder, in none of these places is ChatGPT a replacement for skill. If you use ChatGPT in an unskilled way and just uncritically take what it gives you, you're probably going to make a bad time for yourself. I think ChatGPT is going to make good programmers even better, and it's going to help inexperienced programmers create a bigger mess even faster. So be careful about that. Takeaways. ChatGPT to generate entire functions or programs sometimes is useful. But in my opinion, that's not usually the most valuable use case for ChatGPT. The more valuable use cases are testing, learning new technologies, and planning. By using ChatGPT in this way, we can think less about the low-level grunt work and more about the big picture things that we want to accomplish. I have a podcast called the Code with Jason podcast, where I've had international celebrities like DHH, Sandy Metz, and Adrian and Lucian. I hold a weekly online meetup called the Code with Jason Meetup. I actually do 2 per week, but the one on Sundays happens at a time zone that's Europe friendly. It happens at 18 o'clock Bucharest time. I would really love to see you guys there. And you can find all these things at codewithjason.com. As Adrian mentioned, I have a snail mail newsletter. I would really love to send you a letter in the mail. Adrian and Lucian are both signed up for the snail mail newsletter. And like they said, they cannot unsubscribe.
I love it. I just can't wait for it.
I have an upcoming book. I guess I forgot the word book. It's called The AI Advantage. It's going to be published through Manning. It's coming out sometime in 2024. A lot of these things I talked about will be in the book, plus more stuff. Again, you can find all this stuff at codewithjason.com. My email is jason@codewithjason.com. I'm Jason Swett on Twitter. If anybody wants to talk about any of this stuff or any other programming-related things, I would be very happy to talk with you in the hallway or whatever. I don't like to take questions from the stage, but I'd be very happy to talk with anybody in the hallway after this.